Hi, here we are again. This is the Nature Foundation doing our virtual field trips, and we're happy that you could join us. Today we're going to talk a little bit about man's entrance on the scene. The last time we were together, one of the things we talked about was the geology. And we talked about the age of the rock and the age of the landform. And there's another chapter in there that I'm going to share with you later. And that's how it goes from the landform to the coverlet of forest that's here. And there have been several iterations of that. But we'll talk about that later. But let's today talk a little bit about man's entrance upon the scene. And man's entrance upon the scene, the landscape was as it is. The tree composition would have been different, but this would have been as far back as 10,000 years ago. The unique thing about Wintergreen, the unique advantage we have here, is that the Blue Ridge reaches pretty much its narrowest point here. Therefore, even long before we got here at Wintergreen, it was a crossing point. It was an easy passage from east to west going across this mountain range. Therefore, it makes sense that Native Americans used this place extensively. Where the mountain inn is today, been used for thousands of years. So about 10,000 years ago were the earliest Native Americans here. What we know as a bow and arrow didn't come to be until about 2,000 years ago. The person who's the expert on this is Carol Nash, a PhD professor at James Madison University. So today is sort of an abbreviated version of what Carol would tell you. But 10,000 years to about 2,000 years ago, there were Native Americans here, and they chose certain spots. They almost chose a spot that was fairly level and a spot that was near water and had good sunlight. Some say facing the rising sun. I don't know about that. But those are sites you can almost predict on a topo map where some of these sites were. And by site, I mean primarily campsites. Although we have found pottery here and tools here, a number of tools over the years. So at this juncture in time, we had a forest that was a little different. That's another chapter. So water, level ground, some sunlight. So what else do you need to know? Well, you need to know what they used to make tools. And in my hand are some little chips of a material called quartzite. And I don't know, Kathy, if you can zoom in on that or not, but it's sort of a quartz, but it's a sandy quartz. It's a meta sandstone. And you'll remember when we were on the overlook, we talked about the ridges to the west and how erosion resistant they were. And they're made from this material. And so if you find quartzite on the greenstone in the old Blue Ridge complex here, you know someone had to bring it here. So this is the sort of the third characteristic of a site. If you walk across it and you find quartzite chips, as we find in a number of areas, you know someone had to bring it here. And this would have been the Native Americans who were camped here. There are lots and lots of archaeological sites at Wintergreen, but I must remind you that if you find projectile points and take them home with you, you take away the credibility of the site. And that's very important because from an archaeologist standpoint, where the artifact is found is at least, if not more significant than the artifact itself. One other detail, we tend to think of the Native Americans making arrowheads, which more properly are called projectile points. But the bow and arrow didn't come about till much later. And a lot of these early points, if they're older than 2,000 or 3,000 years ago, they were used and attached to what's called a throwing stick. And it was something like this. There would have been a notch here, a projectile point here, and they were able to throw this with great accuracy. And what this did with the notch is it gave it leverage. And there are actually incidences, I believe, of an atlatl being thrown hard enough to penetrate light armor. So many of the artifacts that are found here are from the atlatl or the throwing stick.